An experimental Monaco Grand Prix didn't quite fire into life as Formula 1 hoped, but it was a fascinating weekend and a storied race, so here's everything we learned from Monte Carlo. Lando Norris scored pole position and won a Grand Prix for the first time since the season opener in Australia. In Monaco, one does tend to lead to the other, so this was an ideal place for Norris to banish his qualifying hoodoo. Norris felt he was driving better and smarter in Monaco after a concerted effort to tidy up the approach that had led to too many errors earlier in the season. It's no secret that Norris has struggled more than teammate Oscar Piastri with the McLaren car changes that have dulled the feeling the drivers get from the front axle, but it was Piastri who suffered more from how the car moved around at low speed in Monaco. McLaren still hopes to improve the core issue during the season, but until then it has tried to help with setup tweaks and just working with both drivers to help them understand what the car is doing and why in certain situations. According to team boss Andrea Stella, Norris has now been rewarded for his part in that process and was able to drive quickly and consistently all week in Monaco, whereas, unusually for this year, it was Piastri who had good peaks but lost his rhythm at key moments. Norris didn't quite nail it in qualifying. As Stella pointed out, there was some lap time left on the table and he believes there's still more to come from Norris to be at his absolute best over one lap. But this was an important step, and in Monaco it was enough for Norris to score a very important victory. Ferrari had its strongest weekend of the year in Monaco, with Charles Leclerc qualifying and finishing second. That's despite the 2024 Monaco winner being pessimistic about his chances heading into the weekend. But while Leclerc was pleasantly surprised that his Ferrari was a genuine victory contender for the first time in 2025, he knows that for now it's a one-off. The car fundamentally has a good mechanical package in terms of riding bumps and curbs. That, combined with a bit of Leclerc magic when it comes to dancing between the walls, meant the Ferrari was seriously fast, albeit not quite as quick as the McLaren. The trouble is, it's only on an extreme outlier circuit like Monaco that Ferrari's strength mechanically comes into play. This is because, for more conventional circuits, Ferrari must compromise its setup to achieve the best balance between high and low speed corners and ensure that bottoming out, and therefore plank wear, isn't a problem. The net result is that low speed strength is sacrificed and becomes a weakness. So it's back to business as usual in Barcelona this weekend then? Well, maybe, or maybe not. As team principal Fred Vasseur points out, the technical directive on front wing flexibility kicks in and that could change the game. So while there is hope for Ferrari, it's not because its Monaco revival was a breakthrough. Liam Lawson was adamant going into the Monaco weekend that things had clicked for him back at Red Bull's second team several races ago. He just didn't have a result to show for it. Well, now he does, as the ex-Red Bull racing driver has finally banked his first points of the season. It was a much needed breakthrough in terms of the final result for Lawson, although it would be remiss not to point out he was still overshadowed pretty much all weekend by his rookie teammate Isaac Hadjar. Lawson did a good job, no question, and played the team game perfectly on Sunday with the first case of backing up other cars that led to more teams deploying such tactics later on. But he was the slower Racing Bulls driver, as Hadjar made a huge impact on his first trip to Monaco. Initially, that came in the wrong way, as Hadjar hit the wall twice in FP2. He was lucky the first one didn't end that session right at the start. If that happened and he lost an hour of practice, Hadjar's weekend could have looked very different. Instead, he was able to take full advantage of his second chance, and what he did to qualify 6th fastest was exceptional for a rookie. To then consolidate that with 6th in the race, his best result in F1, was a deserved reward for an outstanding Monaco debut, even if he said he was struggling to stay awake at times because the carefully managed stints were so boring. Fernando Alonso's run of bad luck continued, with an ERS problem that he'd been managing for some time, ultimately forcing him out of the race while on course for 7th place. But nevertheless, there are reasons for optimism at Aston Martin. Earlier in the season, slower corners were a weak point, with Alonso complaining that the car was dying at low speed. Yet Alonso performed strongly at Monaco, and this is a little different to Ferrari's situation, as while there was no need to compromise the setup to work across a wide corner speed range, the upgrade package introduced a week earlier at Imola was reckoned to have improved the car across the board. Given Aston Martin struggled the last time F1 raced on a street track in Miami, its Monaco form suggested progress is genuine. And with Adrian Newey on site in green for the first time, and having now breathed a little of his magic on the 2025 car, despite his main focus being on next year, Aston Martin's performance is finally trending in the right direction. The problem now is turning that speed into points. Kimi Antonelli admits himself that he needs a reset after 2 consecutive difficult Formula 1 weekends. His poor performance at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix was widely put down to not being in the right headspace, as a combination of promotional events and extracurricular fun like inviting his classmates to the track took his focus and energy a bit too much away from what was needed to deliver inside the car. But even in Monaco, things didn't click, and his weekend in the Principality was derailed by a qualifying crash in Q1 as he clipped the Armco on the entry to the Nouvelle chicane and then ran off into the barriers on the outside. While the Imola and Monaco disappointments don't appear linked, there does seem to be a common trend, and that is Antonelli struggling to get on top of the quirks of Pirelli's softest C6 tyre, which has now appeared for each of the past 2 races. The compound is certainly a tricky one for teams and drivers to get on top of. Mastering its very peaky grip, especially on its first lap, the extreme thermal management needed to try to get both axles into the right temperature operating window, plus coping with the feeling of movement as the rubber is put under load in corners, are all things that Antonelli himself still needs to do better with. He'll be relieved that this weekend's Spanish Grand Prix sees F1 shift to its hardest compound tyres, but the C6 will be back straight after in Canada, and that means Antonelli has some work to do. How would you like to win a Ferrari cap signed by either Charles Leclerc or Lewis Hamilton? We've got these incredible prizes to offer 2 lucky winners, courtesy of our friends at Monaco Inside Track, who offer walking tours of the roads that form that iconic F1 circuit, full of detailed insight about the history of that incredible race. To enter, all you have to do is be a member with us on Patreon. Then head to our competition post and comment with the name of the Ferrari driver whose signed cap you'd like to win. You can only enter once, but you are allowed to say both drivers. And as an added bonus for anyone in our Champions tier, you'll be granted a double entry if you take part. This competition is open to anyone with an active membership in either our Racers tier or the Champions tier. So head to the link in the description of this episode to enter before the competition closes on May 31st. And you can currently get 75% off your first month with us as we celebrate F1's 75th birthday. So hurry and sign up. Don't miss out. The knock-on effect of the Racing Bulls tactic in Monaco was for Williams to do the same to hold on to a double points finish with both cars having been backed into the midfield. And this in turn led to what Alex Albon called a cheeky move from George Russell to deliberately cut the chicane to get ahead of the deliberately slow Williams. Russell did that because he was happy to take the usual 10-second penalty for going off track and gaining an advantage, and was surprised to get slapped with a drive-through penalty instead. This was because the FIA had made it clear before the race that given the potential for such tactics to be deployed, any deliberate corner cutting to get ahead of a slow car could be dealt with more severely than usual. But, as Russell pointed out, he still finished in a higher position by doing what he did, because the drive-through was still not sufficient to fully cancel out the gain in lap time by getting ahead of Albon and driving flat out. Russell said that showed the system's pretty flawed, and while he was referencing the 2-stop strategy experiment, the same could also be said of F1's penalties. Regardless of the fact what Russell did was understandable in the circumstances, clearly even harsher penalties are needed to avoid the most extreme cases of drivers and teams gaming the system. Monaco set a new basement for how bad Alpine could be in 2025. Prior to the weekend, it was at best capable of snapping at the heels of the top 4 teams, and at worst, buried deep in midfield mediocrity. But in Monaco, it was clearly the worst car. To underline just how bad it was, the best lap set by an Alpine was 1.1 seconds slower than around the same track last year, at a point in the season when the team was still deep in the mire. So, what went wrong? Well, the team went into the weekend confident of a good performance, but the car proved terrible over the bumps and curbs. As Gasly admitted, that's a known weakness. To make matters worse, Gasly rear-ended Yuki Tsunoda's Red Bull early in the race, while teammate Franco Colapinto spent most of the Grand Prix in traffic on what he called a Sunday drive. In need of results, given this is the second of only 5 events he's officially been confirmed for, he struggled for confidence, particularly on the C6 Pirellis. Considering Alpine managed to score a point in an overweight, unwieldy car 12 months ago, this was surely a new low for the team. Whether F1's move to make Monaco a 2-stopper was viewed as a success or a failure is very much down to opinion. What it has done is give Grand Prix racing's bosses some food for thought about where things go from here. On the plus side, the mandatory 2 stops threw in a fair degree of strategy uncertainty, with varied thoughts in play at the front of the field about how best to map the way to the finish. As Red Bull and Max Verstappen held on as long as possible in the hope of a safety car or red flag allowing them to steal the win from Lando Norris, the destiny of the trophy hung in the balance right until the end. But on the downside was the blatant manipulation of race results further down the pack, as first Racing Bulls, then Williams and finally Mercedes all played games between their 2 cars to block rivals and open up gaps. This was not racing in its purest sense. The criticisms these tactics triggered, even though teams well knew in advance this was the game to play at Monaco, exposed the fact there is nothing F1 can really do to stop things like this happening while cars struggle to overtake on this track. Sorting out ways to make passing at least possible is ultimately what F1 needs to focus on to prevent park the bus tactics happening again around Monaco in 2026.